So, NATO has been good for Europe. But NATO has also been good for the United States. And through NATO, the United States has more friends and allies than any other power. This has made the United States stronger, safer, and more secure. Madam Speaker, Mr. Vice President, it is good to have friends.
That was NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg Wednesday addressing a joint meeting of Congress. Stoltenberg's Washington visit comes as the 29 member nations mark the 70th anniversary of the NATO alliance and amid tensions with President Trump, who has accused some NATO countries of not paying their fair share. John Hanna is senior counselor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Welcome. Good to see you again. Let me ask you about NATO. A lot of celebrating this week, 70 years, but below the surface, a lot of tension. How much trouble is NATO in?
Well, I am worried, Paul. This week was a little strange. On the one hand, it was supposed to be a celebration, but at times it felt like a bit of a memorial service.
Yeah.
I do have a sense that people are worried about the alliance, not so much because of a lack of resources or capabilities on our eastern flank that can confront a resurgent Russia, but it's more the psychological component, the political will of NATO. At the end of the day, the bottom line is the United States prepared to fight and die for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, much less Montenegro, and coming soon to a theater near you, North Macedonia? That's the bottom line question, and I think that issue is more in doubt today than it has been in a very long time.
Okay. Now, is that because of the psychology of the American public right now, who's kind of forgotten that we fought two wars, bloody wars in the last century, or is that because of President Trump or President Obama? What's behind that changing, that doubt in your mind about whether we would fight?
Well, I think in the longest term sense, I think that it has been the last 20 years a sense of war fatigue on the part of the American people, the financial crisis, and just a doubt that we're getting all the value we need out of these multilateral alliances, and a political leadership, I think, really beginning with President Obama, that hasn't, at the end of the day, really been prepared to defend the alliance and remind and educate the American people about just how valuable it is to have this collection of the most powerful and richest liberal democracies in the world who, when the chips are down, are prepared to come and fight and die with the United States in all areas of the world, including places like Afghanistan and the fight in Syria and Iraq against ISIS. It's a capability, the ability to fight with allies that none of our strongest adversaries can compete with. Not Russia, not China, and certainly not the Iranians or North Korea.
But let me ask you about the sense that, and this is a point that President Trump is really getting at, which is that maybe by providing so much of of NATO's capability and so much of the military power, we've created a dependency in Germany and some other countries where they feel, you know what, we really don't need to spend as much because when push comes to shove, the Americans are doing the job for us. And we know that Germany isn't spending as much as it should on defense.
Yeah, there's no question. This is a perennial problem, Paul, that's gone back not just 1 or 2 decades, but 4 or 5 decades that American presidents have been complaining about our allies' refusal to really step up and carry their fair share of the burden. That continues to be the case, although one has to say, and the Trump administration ought to claim some credit for it, that since that invasion of Crimea and eastern Ukraine in 2014, the alliance is now on track to add an additional $100 billion worth of capabilities. And the fact is that alone and by themselves, as a collective, Canada and Europe have a combined defense capability and spending that exceeds that of Russia and China combined. It's a significant capability that's added to American capability. They host American forces so that in any future confrontation, we're going to be fighting on the borders of Russia, not on the Atlantic seaboard of the United States. And we're able to project power around the world, not only against Russia, but obviously into the Middle East from Europe. And again, these are the richest, strongest countries in the world, trading partners. So there is tremendous capability there.
Right. Do you think that, do you foresee that Vladimir Putin is looking for an opportunity to test NATO and whether or not we really would come to the defense of the Baltic states, for example, or Macedonia or some other country?
Yes, I do think that that risk, while still relatively small, has gone up over the last several years. Again, it is, at the end of the day, it is that psychological component, the thought that there is an American president who somewhere in the back of his mind believes that NATO and the EU and our relationship with Europe is a part of some great big con against the United States to rob our wealth and to take advantage of us, that it's a sucker's play to some extent. I think that does erode the underlying message of deterrence that the alliance has to convey to Russia, and it encourages a Putin that thinks he can challenge and split NATO and fracture NATO and unravel the alliance. It gives him some part that he might be able to do that.
All right, John Hanna, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.